Hi again. My name is Lindsay Woodsbong, and I am one of the co-pastors here at Foothill Community Presbyterian Church. And this is your orientation for Worship Around the Neighborhood for the week of November 8th. Hopefully you got to experience last week's Worship Around the Neighborhood and are excited to connect with the material this week. This week, the scripture reading is again from the Gospel of Matthew, but this time from chapter 25. This is a parable that some of us might not have as much experience with. It's sometimes referred to as the parable of the virgins or the maidens. And it is a scripture reading where Jesus is trying to teach us about being ready and putting our faith at the center of our lives and making it a priority. So in your packets, of course, you will start, the first page is the family devotional that gives you 4 different scripture readings that you can read from, although we'll be focusing again on Matthew chapter 25. It also gives you something to think about this week, where the author of Seasons of the Spirit asks us, what is it that keeps our faith alive or alight? We're going to be playing a lot with the symbol of oil in this week's Worship Around the Neighborhood. And so some of the interpretation of that is to say oil in this scripture reading is the fuel that keeps our faith ready. So what is the fuel that keeps your faith ready? And so I want you to think about that and consider that as we go through the different activities, and perhaps open with that conversation as you gather with your COVID bubble, whoever that may be. Next, I want to review this week there are 3 different activities that you can choose or do all together in your COVID bubble. The first, which I know that some of our younger folks are most excited about, is making lamps. Our vision statement at Foothill is to be salt and light to a world that needs it. And so this is our chance to kind of build that light. And so you have your little Ziploc baggie with some clay. Again, this is not bakeable clay, so it's going to stay soft no matter what. If you would like to have clay that'll harden, so you have something to keep at the end of this, there is a wonderful recipe for you to make self-hardening clay. And that might be a fun activity, especially if you have multiple generations around, or you just want a good time to laugh together as you're making something together. And you're going to be forming or making little oil lamps. And as we make those little oil lamps, the ideal is that each one would be big enough to hold one of these little Vesper light candles. We only included 1 in each box, sometimes 2 if we knew you had a larger group in your box. If you're going to be using just exclusively the clay that the church provides, you may end up with little mini lamps, and you might need to put the candle in the midst of them just as a symbol that those lamps were carrying the oil and that this was the light of Christ. But certainly for those of you that are more artistic, you may want to make your own clay or get some clay ahead of your Worship Around the Neighborhood so that each can make a lamp that is big enough and then get a Vesper candle for each person, a tea light for each person, so that everyone can make a lamp. But as you're doing that, ask one another and think about what is it that lights your faith, that brings your faith to light. And a lot of times as we do these tactile experiences, it gets our brains and our spirits moving to having those deeper conversations. For those of you that want to be a little bit more cerebral, so the older groups, the teenagers through adults, we have 2 different readings here. One is a poem, and for many of us, poetry allows that space in our minds to really connect our emotions with the scripture reading. And so we encourage you to read The Blessing in Waiting, or the contemporary reading of the scripture, Enough for All. And really, I love the conclusion of the disciples at the end of the Enough for All reading, which is that last section of November 8th, prior to the children's activity sheets, where it says the disciples thought deeply about this story and what it might mean after Jesus tells them this parable. Perhaps, said one of the disciples, we should be ready at all times to keep the light of God's love shining. And so allow that to kind of challenge one another in your conversations. What is it that we are called to do to make ourselves ready? And how can we confess that really there are many times that we aren't ready? to seek God or to experience God, and allow that confession to take place, because when we're honest with God, that creates that space for God to help us grow. And then the last activity, this is again a material that's not included in your kit because we wanted to be mindful of potential allergies that folks may have. But we ask that you go and find some oil in your home. Olive oil is a traditional oil that people use to anoint one another. Some people use baby oil if they happen to have that in their home because they know that that is good on skin. But if you have oil in your home, to take that oil and to anoint one another, which means just simply putting your finger in the oil and making the sign of the cross. And when we would do worship around the dinner table, it would often be on someone's hand because the intimacy of the faith. And especially in these COVID times, we may not want to, unless you're actually exclusively within your own household, anoint one another, but allow, perhaps have the bowl of oil and let everyone put their finger in and then anoint themselves, but you say the words together so that there is this sense of blessing one another. And that connection of oil is really a beautiful interpretation of this scripture, right? The scripture was about these bridesmaids or these virgins being prepared to go into a wedding banquet, and the fact that some weren't ready to wait, that they weren't prepared, and it caused them to miss out. And so the oil was really meant to be this symbol of preparation. But then there's something beautiful in the fact that oil is also used in the church as a sign of blessing of one to another, where we allow the blessings of God to spread out over all of God's people, that it's not like, oh, I have all the blessings and you are going without. And so when we anoint one another in this, as we read this scripture reading, what we're really saying is that we're propping that door back open. That for those virgins that miscalculated, we're saying, hey, let me bless you and let me bring you back into the fold. Because I think that sometimes Jesus tells us these parables to make us uncomfortable enough to lead us to live differently. And if we are the young maidens that didn't pack enough oil, it leads us to be the people that pack more oil because we need to make God more of a priority. But if we are the maidens that did pack enough oil, this story should also challenge us. Do we pack enough in order to share? So that I'm not just looking out for myself in my life of faith, but that I learn to have enough faith to share it with others. One of the promises that we made, that I teach parents to make when parents choose to have their children baptized and their children are too young to make those baptismal promises on their own, is Pastor Andy and I actually ask the questions of faith to the parents and to the children. Because we say that until those kids can claim the faith for themselves, you as the sponsor for that baptism have to have enough faith for both. So in this sense, are you carrying enough oil to light both lamps? And how do we become those people that have such an abundance that we can share and expect to share that faith with others? And then, of course, lastly, we do have our storytime and children's activity sheets included in our booklets this week, as well as another art activity that we don't have the resources for here, but for parents that have younger disciples in their homes, a really fun way to make a little globe so that your children might be able to take probably an electric tea light and put it in there and be able to really think about what it means to have God's light. And I think for children, as opposed to the oil lamp, which is a bit harder of a metaphor, they certainly get the idea of a nightlight. And how can God be my nightlight in dark or scary places? So I hope that worship around the neighborhood is going great for you, that this is an opportunity for you to invite those in your bubble, perhaps those that you would have never shared your faith with before, other folks that live with you, or perhaps the sister that takes care of your kids. It gives you an opportunity to really just have those conversations of faith and be a safe space for us to experience the divine together and understand that God is speaking through us and to us as we connect with one another. And so thank you for joining me. And as always, with Christ's love, may you answer the call, connect with hope, and care for neighbors. We will see you next time.